Everything celebrated about Odysseus hides another face. Every legend quietly rearranges memory, while overlooked clues whisper impossible connections. Familiar heroes suddenly feel unfamiliar. Every voyage masks deeper designs. Watch each mystery dismantle inherited assumptions, leaving only irresistible doubt and one unstoppable desire. Keep watching until every hidden thread emerges together. Sunlight spills across a rugged coastline where steep green hills descend toward the Ionian Sea, and narrow coves shelter quiet fishing boats from the restless winds. Stone terraces cling to the mountainsides, shaped by generations of hands that transformed rocky slopes into places where olive trees and grapevines could survive. At first glance, it is a landscape of remarkable beauty, peaceful and familiar. Yet every path, every ruined wall, and every distant headland seems to carry an unsettling question. Is this truly the Ithaca that inspired one of the greatest journeys ever told? Or has the real homeland of Odysseus remained hidden somewhere else all along? For more than 2,000 years, travelers have stood upon this island, believing they had reached the kingdom of Homer's legendary king. The modern Greek island known as Ithaca has long been accepted as the place from which Odysseus departed for Troy, and to which he struggled to return after 20 years of war and wandering. Ancient writers identified it with confidence. Medieval pilgrims accepted the tradition, and generations of visitors have followed in their footsteps. Yet, when Homer's own descriptions are read carefully, certainty begins to fade. The Odyssey offers surprisingly detailed geographical clues. Homer describes Ithaca as lying furthest toward the west, while neighboring islands such as Same, Dulichion, and Zacynthus occupy specific positions around it. The island is portrayed as rugged rather than fertile, rich in goats more than horses, surrounded by smaller islets, and overlooked by the forested slopes of Mount Neriton. At first, these details appear straightforward, but when historians compare the poem with the geography of today's Ionian islands, unexpected contradictions emerge. Modern Ithaca lies east of Kephallonia rather than west. Depending on how Homer's language is translated, this creates a puzzle that has fascinated scholars for centuries. Did Homer describe directions differently? Were ancient navigational conventions unlike our own? Or was he describing an entirely different island whose identity has since been forgotten? The debate has produced countless theories, each attempting to reconcile poetry with geography. Some scholars argue that the problem lies not with the island, but with language itself. Ancient Greek directional terms may have reflected sailing routes, prevailing winds, or even the position of the rising and setting sun instead of modern compass bearings. If so, Homer's descriptions might fit the present-day island more comfortably than they initially appear. Others remain unconvinced. They point out that Homer was often remarkably precise when describing landscapes elsewhere. His depictions of coastlines, harbors, and mountains frequently correspond with real places around the eastern Mediterranean. If his geography was reliable in many instances, why would Ithaca alone contain such significant inconsistencies? This uncertainty has encouraged researchers to search beyond the accepted location. Perhaps the most famous alternative focuses on the neighboring island of Kephallonia. According to one influential hypothesis, the western peninsula, known as Peliki, may once have been separated from the rest of Kephallonia by a narrow sea channel. If geological changes later filled this channel through landslides or earthquakes, Peliki would have appeared as an independent island during the late Bronze Age, the period traditionally associated with Odysseus. Supporters of this theory suggest that Peliki matches several of Homer's geographical descriptions more closely than modern Ithaca does. Certain bays resemble those described in the epic. Mountain ranges align in intriguing ways. Distances between neighboring islands sometimes appear more consistent with the poem's narrative. Geologists have investigated whether such a channel could have existed thousands of years ago. Massive earthquakes are common throughout the Ionian region, and landslides have dramatically reshaped the landscape many times. Some researchers believe that ancient geological evidence leaves room for this possibility. Others disagree. They argue that available evidence does not conclusively demonstrate the existence of a navigable channel during the Bronze Age. Geological interpretations remain complex, and not all specialists accept the proposed reconstruction of the ancient coastline. The mystery persists because neither side possesses decisive proof. Archaeology offers another layer to the investigation. Excavations on modern Ithaca have uncovered Mycenaean settlements dating to the late Bronze Age. Pottery, buildings, and burial sites reveal that the island was indeed inhabited during the era traditionally linked to the Trojan War. These discoveries demonstrate that an organized society existed there long before classical Greece emerged. Among the most intriguing discoveries is a large complex at Agios Athanasios, sometimes referred to as the School of Homer. Excavations revealed impressive structures, staircases carved into bedrock, underground water systems, and artifacts dating to the Mycenaean period. Some archaeologists have suggested that the site may have served as an important administrative or elite center. Could this have been the palace of Odysseus? The evidence remains inconclusive. No inscription identifies the owner. No royal archive confirms the existence of Homer's famous king. The buildings certainly belonged to influential individuals, yet connecting them directly to the legendary ruler requires assumptions that archaeology alone cannot support. Elsewhere, competing discoveries complicate the picture even further. Different locations across the Ionian Islands have each been proposed as Homer's palace. Ancient walls, strategic hilltops, and impressive ruins have all inspired claims that they preserve traces of the kingdom described in the Odyssey. Every proposal highlights similarities while confronting equally significant differences. The deeper researchers look, the more elusive certainty becomes. Another question quietly shadows the entire discussion. Did Homer intend readers to interpret Ithaca as a perfectly accurate geographical location? Many scholars remind us that epic poetry was never designed as a modern map. Oral traditions evolved over centuries before being written down. Storytellers adapted familiar landscapes, reshaped local traditions, and blended historical memories with imaginative storytelling. The Ithaca of the Odyssey may therefore represent not a single island, but an idealized homeland assembled from multiple real places. Yet this explanation introduces another mystery. Why preserve so many detailed geographical references if precision was never important? Why mention neighboring islands, distinctive mountains, hidden harbors, and recognizable landmarks if listeners were not expected to visualize an actual location? Perhaps those details reflected places well known to audiences whose world has since changed beyond recognition. Ancient coastlines shifted. Harbors silted up. Earthquakes altered mountains. Entire settlements disappeared beneath later construction or natural erosion. Even if Homer described a real landscape with remarkable accuracy, that landscape itself may no longer exist in the same form. Fragments of memory often outlive the places they describe. Ancient writers themselves occasionally expressed uncertainty. While many accepted the traditional identification of Ithaca, others debated aspects of Homer's geography, recognizing that the epic contained puzzles not easily resolved. The questions that occupy modern scholars are, in many respects, remarkably old. Outside academic circles, more speculative ideas have emerged over the years. Some propose that the Odyssey preserves memories of locations far beyond Greece. Others imagine that Homer intentionally disguised real places to preserve forgotten traditions or political histories. These theories remain highly controversial and lack broad scholarly acceptance, yet they illustrate how deeply the mystery continues to capture the imagination. Perhaps this enduring fascination says as much about the Odyssey as it does about geography itself. Odysseus spent years searching for home, repeatedly arriving at places that looked familiar, yet proved to be something else entirely. His journey blurred the boundary between memory and reality, between what seemed certain and what remained forever just beyond reach. In an unexpected way, those searching for Ithaca may now find themselves following the very path Homer described, guided by clues that appear convincing, only to discover that every answer opens another question, and that the true destination may still be waiting somewhere beyond the next horizon. If the landscape of Ithaca continues to resist certainty, then another question naturally follows. Even if the island could one day be identified beyond doubt, would that finally reveal the identity of the man who supposedly ruled it? Or would the greatest mystery remain not the place itself, but the figure standing at the center of the story? A weathered bronze sword rests inside a museum display, its once polished blade now darkened by more than 3,000 years of time. Nearby lie fragments of boars' tusk helmets, broken spearheads, clay tablets marked with the earliest forms of Greek writing, and the crumbling foundations of Mycenaean palaces. Together, they belong to a vanished world that flourished during the late Bronze Age, a world of ambitious kings, fortified citadels, fragile alliances, and endless rivalries. It is within this forgotten landscape that many researchers begin searching for the real Odysseus. The Homeric hero is often remembered for his intelligence more than his strength. Unlike Achilles, whose reputation rests upon unmatched martial skill, Odysseus survives through calculation, patience, persuasion, and deception. He disguises himself when necessary, invents elaborate strategies, and repeatedly escapes dangers through wit rather than force. His famous encounter with the Cyclops has become one of the defining moments of ancient literature, not because of overwhelming violence, but because of careful planning and psychological manipulation. These qualities make him unique among heroic figures. Yet, they also raise an intriguing historical question. Did Homer invent such an unusually complex character? Or was he preserving memories of a real leader whose reputation endured long after his lifetime? The earliest references to Odysseus appear within the epic tradition itself. Unlike some rulers whose names survive on inscriptions or administrative tablets, no surviving Mycenaean document explicitly identifies a king named Odysseus ruling Ithaca. This absence has often been noted, but it is hardly surprising. The surviving written records from Mycenaean Greece consist largely of economic inventories written in Linear B, recording livestock, grain, taxes, and religious offerings rather than heroic biographies. The silence of the archives neither confirms nor disproves his existence. Instead, historians turn to broader patterns. The political world described in the Odyssey bears striking similarities to what archaeology has revealed about late Bronze Age Greece. Independent kingdoms ruled by local monarchs dominated the landscape. Powerful centers such as Mycenae, Pylos, Sirens, and Thebes controlled surrounding territories through networks of nobles, administrators, and warriors. Kings maintained prestige through diplomacy as much as military success, often relying upon alliances that could shift with remarkable speed. Within such a system, a ruler like Odysseus would not have been impossible. A smaller island kingdom would have depended less upon overwhelming military strength than upon negotiation, trade, and strategic thinking. An intelligent leader capable of navigating rival powers may have been far more valuable than the greatest battlefield champion. Some scholars therefore suggest that Homer's portrait reflects authentic qualities admired in certain Mycenaean rulers. Others believe the character evolved over centuries. The Odyssey emerged from an oral tradition in which storytellers passed heroic tales from one generation to another before they were eventually written down. During this long process, historical memories may have blended together. Victories achieved by one leader, voyages undertaken by another, and legends surrounding countless local heroes could gradually merge into a single unforgettable figure. Rather than representing one historical individual, Odysseus may have become a composite hero. This possibility helps explain his remarkable versatility. He appears equally comfortable commanding armies, negotiating with kings, sailing unfamiliar seas, surviving alone in the wilderness, and speaking with extraordinary eloquence. Such a broad range of abilities may reflect generations of storytelling, each adding new accomplishments to an already celebrated name. Yet, there are moments within the epic that feel unexpectedly personal. Odysseus is not portrayed as flawless. He becomes impatient, proud, and occasionally reckless. His decision to reveal his identity to the Cyclops nearly destroys his companions. His long absence leaves lasting scars upon his family. Even after returning home, victory comes at tremendous emotional cost. These imperfections distinguish him from many legendary heroes. Could such psychological complexity preserve genuine memories of an actual ruler, remembered not simply for greatness, but for deeply human strengths and weaknesses? Another possibility shifts the focus away from one individual altogether. Some historians propose that Odysseus may originally have functioned less as a personal name than as a legendary title attached to multiple rulers over time. Similar traditions appear throughout the ancient world, where kings inherited names associated with earlier dynasties or famous ancestors. If this occurred in the Ionian Islands, later storytellers may have condensed generations of rulers into one extraordinary king. No direct evidence confirms this idea, yet neither can it be entirely dismissed. Ancient memory often compresses centuries into the lives of remarkable individuals. There is also the question of chronology. Traditional estimates place the Trojan War somewhere around the late 13th or early 12th century BC, although its exact date remains debated. Shortly afterward, much of the Mycenaean world experienced widespread collapse. Palaces burned, trade networks fractured, writing disappeared from Greece for centuries, entire political systems dissolved. If a historical Odysseus did exist during this turbulent period, his story would have unfolded at the very edge of one of the greatest transformations in Mediterranean history. Perhaps this explains why his journey home feels so uncertain. He returns not merely to reclaim a kingdom, but to restore order in a world already beginning to unravel. Some researchers even suggest that the Odyssey preserves distant memories of this broader collapse. The hostile islands, unpredictable seas, isolated communities, and fading kingdoms encountered during the voyage may symbolically reflect an age in which familiar political landscapes were disappearing before people's eyes. Others caution against reading the epic as disguised history. Poetry follows different rules than historical chronicles. Myth, symbolism, and imagination shape every episode. The gods intervene openly. Monsters inhabit distant shores. Time itself seems to stretch and contract according to the needs of the narrative. Even so, myths often grow from seeds planted in real experience. This has encouraged more speculative interpretations. A few researchers have proposed that Odysseus may represent not a king, but an accomplished Bronze Age navigator, whose extraordinary voyages gradually expanded with every retelling. Others imagine him as a merchant prince whose knowledge of distant trade routes evolved into stories of supernatural adventures. More unconventional theories place his origins even farther afield, suggesting connections with forgotten maritime cultures that once crossed much larger portions of the Mediterranean than traditionally believed. These ideas remain controversial and lack broad scholarly acceptance. Yet, they remind us that the Mediterranean of the Bronze Age was far more interconnected than earlier generations once imagined. Ships carried metals, pottery, textiles, ideas, and stories across enormous distances. Sailors encountered unfamiliar peoples, dangerous coastlines, and natural phenomena capable of inspiring legends that endured for centuries. Perhaps the real Odysseus was neither exactly king nor purely myth. Perhaps he belonged to a generation whose achievements became almost impossible to separate from imagination. As centuries passed, memory transformed experience into epic, while history quietly surrendered details that could never be recovered. Today, the search continues through archaeology, ancient languages, comparative mythology, and the fragile fragments left behind by civilizations long vanished. Each discovery illuminates another small piece of the puzzle, yet the central figure remains just beyond complete understanding. Standing among ruined palaces and weathered harbor stones, it becomes difficult to decide where the historical man ends and the immortal legend begins. And perhaps that uncertain boundary is itself the greatest clue, inviting us to ask whether the real Odysseus has been lost to time, or whether he has been hiding within the story all along. If the identity of Odysseus remains suspended between history and legend, then perhaps the places he visited deserve the same careful scrutiny. Among all the destinations described in the Odyssey, none is more elusive than the island where time itself seemed to lose its meaning, a place untouched by kingdoms, wars, or the passing of generations. Homer called it Ogygia. Imagine an island rising alone from an endless expanse of deep blue water, so distant that no neighboring shore is visible on the horizon. Thick forests cover its hillsides, where towering cypress and fragrant cedar trees sway gently beneath a constant sea breeze. Crystal-clear springs emerge from the earth, feeding small streams that weave through flowering meadows alive with birdsong. Wild vines climb naturally over rocky cliffs, while the air carries the scent of blooming herbs and salt carried from the sea. Hidden within this landscape lies a secluded cave, its entrance shaded by ancient trees, illuminated only by the flickering glow of a fire that never seems to fade. According to Homer, this was the home of Calypso. It was here, after surviving unimaginable hardship, that Odysseus washed ashore alone. Shipwrecked, exhausted, and separated from everyone he had ever known, he entered a world unlike any other described in Greek mythology. Ogygia was neither the kingdom of a mortal ruler, nor the domain of terrifying monsters. Instead, it existed as a place outside ordinary human experience, ruled by a divine figure who offered safety, companionship, and even immortality. Yet, despite every comfort, Odysseus longed to leave. The paradox has fascinated readers for centuries. Why would anyone willingly abandon paradise? Perhaps the greater mystery, however, is whether Ogygia itself was ever meant to represent an actual place. Unlike Ithaca or Troy, whose locations have been debated but never entirely forgotten, Ogygia has resisted every confident identification. Homer provides vivid descriptions of its natural beauty, yet remarkably few geographical details that allow modern scholars to place it with certainty. The island appears isolated, surrounded by immense stretches of open sea, seemingly disconnected from the familiar world of the Eastern Mediterranean. This ambiguity has inspired countless investigations. Ancient Greek writers themselves struggled with Ogyggia's location. Some believed it lay far beyond the western limits of the known world, somewhere near the mysterious waters that later generations associated with the Atlantic Ocean. Others imagined it hidden among remote Mediterranean islands rarely visited by ordinary sailors. Even in antiquity, no single consensus emerged. One of the earliest and most influential attempts came from later classical authors who connected Ogygia with islands beyond the Pillars of Heracles, the narrow passage now known as the Strait of Gibraltar. Beyond that gateway stretched an ocean few Greeks fully understood, a place filled with uncertainty, strange currents, and stories of lands beyond imagination. Could Homer's audience have envisioned Ogygia somewhere within those distant waters? The possibility remains intriguing. During the Bronze Age, Mediterranean sailors possessed far greater navigational abilities than was once believed. Archaeological discoveries demonstrate extensive maritime trade connecting Greece with Cyprus, Egypt, Anatolia, southern Italy, Sicily, and regions far beyond. Ships carried copper, tin, ivory, precious stones, textiles, and ideas across remarkable distances. If such voyages were possible, perhaps memories of distant islands also entered Greek storytelling. Some researchers have proposed Malta as a possible inspiration. Its dramatic coastline, sea caves, freshwater sources, and strategic position within Mediterranean trade routes make it an appealing candidate. Others have pointed toward Gozo, with its isolated coves and rugged landscapes that seem capable of preserving ancient legends. These suggestions, however, face significant challenges. Neither island perfectly matches Homer's descriptions, and no archaeological evidence directly links either location to the story of Calypso. Farther west, another possibility has attracted attention for generations. The island of Gavdos, lying south of Crete, possesses an extraordinary sense of remoteness. Ancient sailors approaching its rocky shores would have found themselves surrounded by open sea, with few visible landmarks connecting it to larger populations. Supporters argue that its isolation reflects Homer's portrayal remarkably well. Yet, here too, certainty remains elusive. Every proposed location appears convincing in some respects while failing in others. Perhaps this is precisely why Ogygia continues to captivate historians. Its mystery seems almost designed to resist final answers. Linguists have approached the question from another direction. The name Ogygia itself may offer subtle clues. In ancient Greek, it carries associations with great antiquity, immense age, or something belonging to a distant primordial era. Rather than functioning solely as a geographical label, the name may describe a place existing outside ordinary historical time, a land so ancient that it predates human memory itself. If this interpretation is correct, Ogygia becomes more than an island. It becomes a symbol of timelessness. This idea aligns closely with Homer's narrative. Odysseus remains with Calypso for 7 years, yet the passage of time feels strangely suspended. The outside world continues moving forward. Kingdoms evolve, families wait, and wars fade into memory, while life upon Ogygia remains unchanged. Nature flourishes without interruption. Seasons seem almost irrelevant. Calypso herself exists beyond aging, untouched by mortality. Was Homer describing geography, or was he exploring a psychological landscape? Modern scholars often emphasize the symbolic dimension of the island. To them, Ogygia represents the temptation to abandon responsibility in exchange for eternal comfort. Odysseus' refusal of immortality becomes one of the defining moments of the epic, not because he rejects paradise, but because he chooses an uncertain human life over endless perfection. Yet, symbolism and geography need not exclude one another. Ancient stories frequently transformed real locations into places carrying deeper meanings. A remote island remembered by sailors could gradually acquire mythical qualities as generations retold its story. Dangerous voyages became supernatural adventures. Natural caves became divine dwellings. Extraordinary isolation evolved into separation from time itself. This blending of observation and imagination appears throughout ancient mythology. Even more speculative theories have emerged over the years. Some researchers have suggested that Ogygia preserves distant memories of islands submerged or altered by rising sea levels following the end of the last ice age. Others connect it with legendary lost lands remembered imperfectly through oral tradition. A handful have proposed links with Atlantic islands visited by early mariners whose experiences later entered Greek storytelling. These interpretations remain highly controversial and lack broad scholarly support. Even so, they reveal how powerfully Ogygia continues to inspire exploration. The island also raises another fascinating question. If Calypso's home truly existed somewhere within the Mediterranean, why has no enduring local tradition preserved its identity with confidence? Many ancient myths became attached to specific mountains, rivers, caves, or temples. Communities proudly associated themselves with legendary events. Ogygia, however, seems to belong everywhere and nowhere at once. Perhaps this absence is meaningful. A place defined by isolation may naturally leave fewer traces than bustling ports or royal capitals. A remote island visited only rarely could disappear from collective memory with surprising speed, especially after the political collapse that followed the end of the Bronze Age. Coastlines changed. Sea routes shifted. Languages evolved. Names were forgotten. The Mediterranean itself became a different world. Standing today upon any quiet island surrounded by endless water, it is surprisingly easy to imagine how ancient sailors might have believed they had reached the edge of ordinary existence. The silence feels different. Distances become difficult to judge. Time seems to slow beneath the rhythm of waves that have crossed these waters for thousands of years. Perhaps somewhere among those countless islands lies the forgotten landscape that inspired Homer. Or perhaps Ogygia survives precisely because it can never be pinned to a single map. Like the memory of Odysseus himself, it drifts between history and imagination, inviting every generation to continue searching and to wonder whether the greatest mysteries are sometimes the ones that refuse to stay in one place. If Ogygia lingered between paradise and reality, then the next destination in Odysseus's journey presents a different kind of mystery. Instead of complete isolation, he arrives in a thriving society unlike any other described in Greek tradition, a kingdom of skilled sailors whose ships seem to move with almost supernatural precision. But where exactly was this remarkable land, and did its people ever truly exist? Morning light reflects across a sheltered harbor where calm waters meet smooth stone quays. Elegant ships rest silently at anchor, their curved hulls polished by countless voyages across open seas. White cliffs rise beyond the coastline, protecting fertile valleys where orchards flourish beneath gentle hills. Nearby, broad streets lead toward an impressive palace decorated with shining bronze, carved columns, and gardens said to bloom throughout every season. The sea is never far away. Every breeze carries the scent of salt, and every horizon suggests another journey waiting to begin. This is the world Homer calls Scheria, the homeland of the Phaeacians. Among all the peoples encountered in the Odyssey, the Phaeacians occupy a curious position. They are neither ordinary mortals nor fully divine. They possess kings, families, laws, and cities much like other Greek societies. Yet, they also enjoy extraordinary abilities that set them apart from the rest of humanity. Their ships, Homer tells us, require no helmsman to guide them. They understand the intentions of their passengers and travel effortlessly across even the darkest seas, reaching distant lands with astonishing speed. To ancient audiences, this may have seemed magical. To modern readers, it raises a different question. Was Homer describing fantasy, or could these remarkable sailors have been inspired by a real maritime civilization, whose abilities appeared almost miraculous to outsiders? The search for Scheria has fascinated historians for centuries. Unlike Ogygia, whose descriptions emphasize mystery and isolation, Scheria feels surprisingly tangible. Homer describes fertile farmland, a bustling harbor, royal architecture, athletic competitions, religious ceremonies, and organized political life. The level of detail suggests a place grounded, at least in part, in genuine observation. Yet, no location matches the description perfectly. Since antiquity, the island of Corfu has stood as the most widely accepted candidate. Situated at the entrance to the Adriatic Sea, Corfu occupies a strategic position along ancient maritime routes connecting Greece with southern Italy and the western Mediterranean. Classical Greek writers themselves eventually identified Corfu with Scheria, and the tradition has remained influential ever since. At first glance, the similarities are compelling. Corfu possesses sheltered harbors, fertile plains, wooded hills, and impressive coastlines that closely resemble Homer's descriptions. Its position also fits Odysseus' gradual return toward Greece after years of wandering through unfamiliar waters. Even today, visitors encounter places locally associated with episodes from the Odyssey. Caves, beaches, and headlands have acquired legendary connections through centuries of storytelling. Yet, closer examination reveals difficulties. Archaeological evidence indicates that Corfu was indeed inhabited during the Late Bronze Age, but the material remains discovered there do not clearly reveal the wealthy and highly sophisticated maritime kingdom portrayed by Homer. Important settlements existed, yet none conclusively match the grandeur of King Alcinous' palace or the remarkable civilization described in the epic. This gap between literature and archaeology has encouraged alternative interpretations. Some scholars suggest that Scheria reflects an idealized version of several maritime communities rather than one specific island. Homer may have combined memories gathered from different ports across the Mediterranean into a single, unforgettable destination. Such blending would not have been unusual. The Odyssey emerged from centuries of oral tradition, during which storytellers likely absorbed descriptions from sailors, merchants, and travelers who had visited distant coastlines. Over generations, separate locations could gradually merge into one extraordinary kingdom. Another possibility shifts attention farther west. A number of researchers have proposed Sicily as a potential inspiration. During the Bronze Age, Sicily occupied a central position within Mediterranean trade networks. Rich natural resources, thriving coastal settlements, and contact with numerous cultures made it one of the region's most dynamic crossroads. Certain coastal landscapes there bear striking similarities to Homer's descriptions. Supporters argue that sailors approaching Sicily after long voyages might easily have regarded its prosperous harbors as almost miraculous compared to smaller island communities farther east. Others look toward the southern Italy. Ancient Greek colonists later established prosperous settlements along those shores, and earlier Bronze Age societies maintained extensive maritime connections long before those colonies existed. Perhaps distant memories of these Western communities eventually found their way into epic tradition. None of these theories, however, has produced decisive evidence. The mystery remains remarkably resilient. The Phaeacians themselves complicate matters even further. Unlike other peoples encountered by Odysseus, they appear unusually isolated from conflict. They possess remarkable wealth, sophisticated craftsmanship, and unmatched naval skill, yet they rarely participate in the wars and rivalries that dominate the wider Greek world. Why? Homer offers a subtle clue. The Phaeacians are said to have once lived closer to the Cyclopes before relocating to Scheria under the leadership of King Nausithous. Whether this migration reflects mythology or distant historical memory remains uncertain. Some historians wonder whether the story preserves echoes of real population movements during the turbulent centuries surrounding the collapse of Bronze Age civilizations. The Eastern Mediterranean experienced enormous disruption around the late 13th and early 12th centuries BC. Kingdoms fell. Trade routes shifted dramatically. Entire coastal populations relocated in response to warfare, environmental pressures, or political instability. Could the migration of the Phaeacians preserve a faint memory of one such movement? It is impossible to know. Yet, the timing invites careful consideration. Maritime archaeology has transformed our understanding of this period. Ancient shipwrecks reveal extensive commercial networks stretching from Greece to Cyprus, Egypt, Anatolia, Sicily, Sardinia, and beyond. Bronze Age sailors crossed astonishing distances with remarkable confidence, transporting copper, tin, pottery, ivory, glass, textiles, and luxury goods. To isolated inland communities, such experienced navigators may well have seemed almost supernatural. Knowledge itself can resemble magic when its methods remain unseen. This observation has led some researchers to reinterpret Homer's description of the Phaeacian ships. Rather than literal enchantment, perhaps their self-guiding vessels symbolized exceptional navigational expertise. Skilled mariners understood stars, winds, currents, seasonal weather patterns, and coastal landmarks with extraordinary precision. To those unfamiliar with such techniques, their voyages might have appeared effortless. In this reading, myth becomes a poetic expression of genuine technological superiority. Other scholars remain more cautious. They emphasize that divine intervention permeates the Odyssey. The gods frequently influence events, and supernatural elements cannot easily be separated from historical possibilities. Attempting to explain every marvelous episode through ordinary reality risks overlooking the poetic intentions of the epic itself. Still, the boundary between myth and history often proves surprisingly thin. Some of the most intriguing theories venture even farther. A few researchers have proposed that the Phaeacians preserve memories of the Minoans, whose advanced maritime culture flourished on Crete centuries before the traditional date of the Trojan War. Others suggest connections with unidentified seafaring peoples whose influence disappeared following the Bronze Age collapse. Even more speculative interpretations imagine Scheria as a symbolic memory of a sophisticated trading civilization lost during widespread regional upheaval. These ideas remain controversial and lack broad scholarly acceptance. Nevertheless, they reflect a growing appreciation for the complexity of ancient Mediterranean navigation. The sea connected civilizations long before written history documented their relationships. Perhaps Homer's audiences inherited fragments of those forgotten connections without fully understanding their origins. One detail continues to intrigue many readers. When the Phaeacians finally transport Odysseus to Ithaca, Poseidon punishes them by turning their returning ship into stone and threatening to seal off their harbor forever. What does this extraordinary ending mean? Some interpret it as a warning against excessive pride before the gods. Others see a symbolic explanation for the disappearance of an earlier maritime civilization whose dominance had faded by Homer's time. Or perhaps it reflects the simple truth that every great seafaring culture, no matter how powerful, eventually yields to history. Standing today beside any quiet Mediterranean harbor, watching fishing boats glide across waters once crossed by Bronze Age sailors, it becomes remarkably easy to imagine how stories like these first emerged. Familiar coastlines dissolve into distant horizons, and every island seems capable of hiding another forgotten kingdom. Whether Scheria was Corfu, Sicily, another forgotten island, or a masterful blend of several real coastlines woven together through generations of oral tradition, its mystery continues to resist every attempt at certainty. Archaeology has uncovered fragments of ancient settlements, maritime trade routes, and prosperous Bronze Age societies across the Mediterranean, yet none can be identified beyond doubt as the homeland of the Phaeacians. Every proposed location offers intriguing clues while leaving equally important questions unanswered. This uncertainty has only strengthened the legend, allowing Scheria to exist in the rare space where historical memory and poetic imagination meet without either fully replacing the other. The Phaeacians themselves remain just as fascinating. Homer describes them as unmatched sailors, living in remarkable prosperity, isolated from conflict, and possessing ships that seemed almost alive, capable of finding their destination without guidance. Some scholars believe these descriptions preserve distant memories of an advanced maritime culture, whose navigational skills appeared extraordinary to neighboring civilizations. Others argue that the Phaeacians were intentionally portrayed as a people standing on the threshold between the human world and the realm of myth, representing the final sanctuary before Odysseus returned to ordinary life. Neither interpretation has ever been conclusively proven, leaving their true identity suspended between history and legend. Perhaps that uncertainty is precisely what gives Scheria its enduring power. Every generation returns to Homer's account with new discoveries, improved archaeological methods, and fresh interpretations, hoping that one overlooked clue may finally reveal where this remarkable kingdom once stood. Yet, the more evidence emerges, the more elusive the answer appears to become. Like Odysseus himself, modern researchers continue to sail from one promising shoreline to another, searching for traces of a civilization that always seems just beyond reach. And perhaps somewhere beyond those calm Mediterranean waters, behind a coastline not yet fully understood or beneath layers of earth still waiting to be explored, the real homeland of the Phaeacians remains hidden in silence. Whether it survives as the memory of an actual Bronze Age society, the echo of several forgotten islands blended into one unforgettable story, or simply as one of the greatest literary creations ever composed, Scheria continues to remind us that some of history's most captivating mysteries are the ones that refuse to surrender their secrets. As long as unanswered questions remain scattered across the ancient sea, the search for the land of the Phaeacians will continue, inviting every new generation to look once more toward the horizon and wonder what may still lie beyond it. If the homeland of the Phaeacians remains hidden somewhere between memory and geography, then perhaps an even greater mystery awaits us. Every island, every voyage, and every unforgettable encounter reaches us through a single voice, a storyteller whose own life has become far more elusive than any place described in the Odyssey. Before searching for lost kingdoms, we must first ask who was telling the story. A worn parchment rests beneath soft museum lighting, its surface covered with elegant lines of ancient Greek, carefully copied by generations of scribes. The ink has faded, the edges have darkened, and tiny imperfections reveal centuries of handling by hands long forgotten. Around it stand marble busts depicting an elderly man with flowing hair, a heavy beard, and unseeing eyes. Visitors recognize the face immediately. They call him Homer. Yet no one knows whether he ever looked like this. No contemporary portrait survives. No personal letters remain. No official record confirms where he lived, when he was born, or even whether he was a single historical individual. Few figures have shaped world literature so profoundly while leaving behind so little certainty about their own existence. For nearly 3,000 years, the name Homer has been attached to two of the most influential works ever composed, the Iliad and the Odyssey. These epics laid the foundation for Greek literature, influenced Roman civilization, inspired poets from Dante to Shakespeare, and continue to shape storytelling today. Yet, behind these monumental achievements stands a shadow. Ancient traditions themselves could not fully agree about the poet's identity. Several cities claimed to be his birthplace: Smyrna, Chios, Colophon, Cyme, Argos, Athens, and Rhodes all preserved local traditions connecting themselves to Homer. Each community offered its own stories, genealogies, and legends explaining why the legendary poet belonged to them. The competition itself is revealing. If reliable records had existed, such disputes would likely never have arisen. Instead, generations inherited memories already clouded by uncertainty. The earliest surviving accounts describing Homer appeared centuries after the poems were traditionally composed. By then, history had already blended with folklore. Some stories portrayed him as a wandering singer traveling from city to city, performing heroic epics before eager audiences. Others described him as blind, suggesting that his extraordinary vision came not through sight, but through poetic inspiration. The image proved remarkably enduring. Even today, Homer is almost universally imagined as a blind bard. But was he? The evidence remains surprisingly thin. The association may partly stem from a character within the Odyssey itself. Demodocus, the blind singer entertained by the Phaeacians, performs songs so moving that Odysseus cannot hide his emotions. Some later readers wondered whether Homer had quietly inserted himself into his own work, disguising autobiography within fiction. It is an appealing idea, yet there is no direct evidence supporting it. Blind poets occupied an honored place in many ancient traditions, and Demodocus may simply represent the respected role of inspired singers rather than a portrait of the author himself. Questions also surround the date of Homer's life. Most scholars place the composition of the Iliad and Odyssey somewhere during the 8th or early 7th century BC, although precise dating remains impossible. This period followed centuries of dramatic change. The Mycenaean kingdoms had collapsed. Writing had disappeared from Greece for generations before gradually returning with the adoption of the alphabet. This timing creates one of the most fascinating puzzles. The epics preserve vivid descriptions of Bronze Age weapons, armor, political systems, and palaces that had largely vanished centuries earlier. At the same time, they also contained features reflecting the poet's own era. It is as though two different worlds coexist within the same narrative. How could this happen? One explanation lies in oral tradition. Long before they were written down, heroic stories were passed from one generation of singers to another. These performers memorized thousands of lines while adapting details for new audiences. Over centuries, historical memories gradually mixed with contemporary realities. Ancient customs survived alongside newer ideas, producing narratives that preserved echoes of multiple periods simultaneously. If this is true, Homer inherited an immense body of traditional material rather than creating everything from nothing. But how much did he contribute personally? That question has fueled one of classical scholarship's longest-running debates. Known simply as the Homeric question, it asks whether the Iliad and Odyssey were truly composed by one remarkable poet or gradually assembled from many different voices. Supporters of a single author point to the extraordinary artistic unity found throughout both epics. Themes echo across hundreds of pages. Characters develop with remarkable consistency. Symbolism, pacing, and emotional depth suggest careful planning rather than accidental compilation. Such sophistication appears difficult to attribute to countless anonymous storytellers working independently. Others reach a different conclusion. They observe small inconsistencies, repeated scenes, and variations in style that may reflect layers added over centuries. Certain episodes seem older than others. Some passages interrupt the narrative flow, while others repeat information already given. Could these be traces of multiple generations preserving and expanding the tradition? Modern linguistic analysis has added new perspectives. The language of Homer is unlike the spoken Greek of any single historical period. Instead, it combines words, grammatical forms, and expressions originating from different dialects and different centuries. Formulaic phrases recur with remarkable regularity, helping singers maintain rhythm while performing lengthy narratives from memory. These discoveries strongly support the existence of a long oral tradition. Yet, they do not eliminate the possibility of an extraordinary final composer. Perhaps Homer inherited ancient songs and transformed them into masterpieces whose structure surpassed anything that came before. Archaeology has quietly strengthened another aspect of the mystery. For many years, scholars assumed that numerous places described in the epics were entirely fictional. Then, excavations revealed impressive Mycenaean palaces, massive defensive walls, Bronze Age armor, ceremonial objects, and administrative records confirming that sophisticated kingdoms flourished centuries before Homer. Suddenly, portions of the poems once dismissed as fantasy appeared grounded in authentic historical memory. How had such details survived across hundreds of years? The answer remains uncertain. Some researchers suggest that professional singers faithfully preserved remarkably accurate traditions through disciplined oral performance. Others argue that surviving ruins themselves inspired later generations, allowing poets to reconstruct fragments of forgotten history through imagination and observation. There are, inevitably, more unconventional theories. A few scholars have proposed that Homer may have been not one person, but a title applied to successive generations of poets. Others imagine a school of composers working collectively under a shared tradition. Some have even suggested that a highly educated woman, writing within a male-dominated society, may have hidden behind the famous name. These proposals remain speculative and lack broad scholarly acceptance. Still, they demonstrate how little certainty surrounds the individual responsible for these enduring works. Even the meaning of the name Homer has invited debate. Some linguists have explored whether it originally referred to a profession, a cultural role, or an inherited designation rather than a personal identity. None of these ideas has achieved consensus, but each reflects the remarkable absence of reliable biographical evidence. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not why so little is known. Perhaps it is how so much survived despite that silence. Empires rose and fell, libraries burned, languages evolved. Kingdoms disappeared beneath later civilizations. Yet the voice attributed to Homer continued crossing centuries, carried first by memory, then by manuscripts, and finally by countless readers across the world. Standing before those weathered manuscripts today, it becomes almost impossible to separate the unseen poet from the stories themselves. Every line feels intensely personal, yet the author remains hidden just beyond reach, much like the distant islands described throughout the Odyssey. Was Homer a single genius preserving the fading memories of a lost age? A master who shaped generations of older songs into timeless epics? Or simply the name later history gave to a tradition far older than any individual could ever embody? The poems endure. The questions endure with them. And perhaps somewhere within every verse lies one final clue, waiting patiently for someone to recognize the voice behind the legend. Even the meaning of the name Homer has become part of the mystery itself. Ancient sources offer conflicting explanations, while modern linguists continue debating its original significance. Some have suggested that the name may once have referred to a profession rather than a person. Others wonder whether it identified a cultural role, a hereditary title, or even a symbolic designation attached to storytellers responsible for preserving heroic traditions. None of these interpretations has achieved scholarly consensus, yet each highlights the extraordinary absence of reliable biographical evidence surrounding one of the most influential literary figures in human history. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not why so little is known about Homer. Perhaps it is how so much survived despite that silence. Empires rose and collapsed. Cities were abandoned. Libraries burned. Languages changed. Kingdoms disappeared beneath newer civilizations, while generations of names faded into obscurity. Yet the voice attributed to Homer continued its journey through time. It passed first from memory to memory, carried by singers before written texts existed. Later, it found refuge within fragile manuscripts copied by careful hands across centuries of uncertainty. Eventually, those manuscripts crossed continents, inspiring philosophers, historians, artists, explorers, and countless readers around the world. Few voices from antiquity have traveled so far while remaining so anonymous. Standing before those weathered manuscripts today, it becomes almost impossible to separate the unseen poet from the stories themselves. Every line feels intensely personal, filled with deep understanding of courage, grief, ambition, loss, and hope. Yet the individual behind those words remains hidden just beyond our reach, much like the distant islands Odysseus spent years searching for across the endless sea. Was Homer a single genius preserving the fading memories of a forgotten age? Was he a master editor who transformed generations of older songs into timeless epics? Or was Homer simply the name later history assigned to a tradition far older than any one individual could ever embody? The poems endure, and so do the questions. Perhaps somewhere within every carefully crafted verse, hidden beneath layers of language and memory accumulated over nearly 3,000 years, one final clue still waits patiently for someone to recognize the true voice behind the legend. If the identity of Homer remains just beyond our grasp, then another mystery emerges from the pages he left behind, one that seems to blur the boundary between careful observation and terrifying imagination. Among all the dangers Odysseus encountered, none has inspired more debate than the narrow passage guarded by two unforgettable forces. Were Scylla and Charybdis nothing more than mythical monsters, or were they poetic names for a real place that ancient sailors feared above all others? The sea is calm at first, reflecting the pale morning sky like polished glass. Towering cliffs rise abruptly from the water, their rocky faces scarred by centuries of wind and salt. The channel between them appears deceptively narrow. Gentle waves drift toward the opening, but beneath the surface, invisible currents begin to pull in conflicting directions. The silence is unsettling. There are no beaches, no sheltered coves, only steep stone walls and dark water whose true depth cannot be guessed. Then the current changes. The sea begins to twist. Water surges toward one side of the passage while distant waves echo against the cliffs with a deep, rhythmic roar. Every sound seems amplified. Every movement feels uncertain. A sailor entering such a place would quickly understand that this was not simply another stretch of coastline. It was a place demanding perfect judgment, where a single mistake could carry devastating consequences. It is here that Homer places one of the Odyssey's most unforgettable episodes. Warned by the enchantress Circe, Odysseus must guide his ship through a narrow strait guarded by two deadly hazards. On one side waits Scylla, a terrifying creature hidden within a cave high above the sea. Homer describes her as possessing multiple heads, each capable of snatching sailors from passing ships with frightening speed. On the opposite side churns Charybdis, an immense whirlpool that repeatedly swallows enormous quantities of seawater before violently expelling it again. Circe offers Odysseus an impossible choice. Steer too close to Charybdis, and the entire ship may disappear forever. Pass nearer to Scylla, and only a handful of men will be lost. Faced with two disasters, Odysseus chooses the lesser one. The decision has become one of the defining moments of ancient literature, a reminder that leadership sometimes demands choosing between outcomes that are both tragic. Yet, behind the symbolism lies an enduring historical question. Did Homer invent these terrifying guardians, or was he describing real maritime dangers remembered through generations of sailors? For centuries, the most widely accepted explanation has centered on the Strait of Messina, the narrow waterway separating Sicily from mainland Italy. At first glance, the resemblance is striking. The strait is famous for its powerful currents, changing tides, unpredictable whirlpools, submerged rocks, and complex patterns of water movement. Even with modern navigation, the passage demands careful attention under certain conditions. In antiquity, before accurate charts, engines, or advanced weather forecasting, these waters could become genuinely hazardous. Ancient Greek and Roman writers frequently associated the Strait of Messina with Scylla and Charybdis. The identification became so widespread that many later generations accepted it almost without question. Standing on the cliffs overlooking the strait today, it is easy to understand why. Strong tidal currents rush through the narrow passage as the waters of the Tyrrhenian and Ionian seas interact. Under particular conditions, rotating eddies form unexpectedly. Reflected waves collide with incoming currents, creating confused and unpredictable seas capable of challenging even experienced navigators. Although modern science explains these phenomena through oceanography, ancient sailors possessed no such vocabulary. What they experienced instead were forces that seemed alive. A whirlpool large enough to seize a small Bronze Age vessel might naturally become remembered as a creature consuming the sea itself. Likewise, jagged cliffs capable of smashing ships or concealed rocks hidden beneath rough water could gradually evolve into a monster reaching down from above. Myth often grows where explanation ends. Yet, the story becomes more intriguing when Homer's own description is examined carefully. Charybdis does not create a permanent whirlpool. Instead, she repeatedly swallows the sea 3 times each day before releasing it again. This rhythmic cycle has prompted scholars to compare the episode with tidal behavior observed in certain narrow channels. While the Strait of Messina experiences tidal exchanges that can generate powerful currents, some researchers question whether they fully match Homer's dramatic portrayal. Others suggest that the poet deliberately exaggerated genuine natural events to heighten the emotional impact of the narrative. After all, epic poetry rarely seeks scientific precision. Its purpose is to transform lived experience into unforgettable storytelling. Scylla presents an even greater challenge. Unlike Charybdis, whose behavior resembles a recognizable natural phenomenon, Scylla appears unmistakably monstrous. Homer describes multiple heads extending from a hidden cave high above the sea, each seizing sailors before retreating beyond reach. Was there ever a real inspiration? One possibility focuses upon the cliffs themselves. Ancient mariners navigating close to steep coastlines often faced sudden rockfalls, collapsing ledges, or violent waves rebounding unpredictably from vertical stone walls. A vessel forced dangerously near such cliffs could lose crew members almost instantly to crashing surf or falling debris. From a distance, these unpredictable dangers might easily become personified. Instead of saying the sea claimed 6 men, storytellers might remember that 6 terrible mouths reached down from the rocks. Another interpretation draws attention to predators. Large marine animals occasionally appeared unexpectedly near coastal passages. Sharks, massive groupers, and even pods of dolphins surfacing suddenly beside fragile wooden ships could have seemed astonishing to inexperienced sailors. While none resemble Homer's description directly, oral traditions have a remarkable ability to reshape ordinary encounters into extraordinary legends over time. Still, many scholars believe Scylla was never intended to represent a single physical object. Instead, she may embody the countless unpredictable threats hidden within dangerous coastlines, hazards impossible to anticipate until they strike. The symbolism becomes even more compelling. Scylla attacks from above, Charybdis threatens from below. Together, they surround the traveler completely, leaving no perfectly safe route forward. This image has survived for nearly 3 millennia because it reflects an experience far beyond ancient navigation. Throughout history, people have repeatedly found themselves forced to choose between competing dangers rather than between safety and disaster. Perhaps this universal truth explains why the story continues to resonate. Yet, archaeology introduces another fascinating dimension. The Bronze Age Mediterranean was far more interconnected than earlier generations imagined. Recent discoveries reveal surprisingly advanced maritime networks stretching across enormous distances. Merchant vessels routinely carried copper from Cyprus, tin from distant sources, pottery from Greece, luxury goods from Egypt, and raw materials from numerous coastal societies. These sailors accumulated practical knowledge passed orally from captain to apprentice. Many dangerous locations undoubtedly acquired memorable names and cautionary tales. Could Scylla and Charybdis have originated as navigational warnings? Some historians believe so. By transforming hazardous waterways into unforgettable monsters, experienced sailors may have ensured that future generations never underestimated particular passages. A frightening story often proves easier to remember than a technical explanation. Others remain cautious. They argue that Homer's account belongs fundamentally to mythology rather than maritime instruction. Divine intervention shapes the voyage throughout the Odyssey, and separating every supernatural element into historical reality risks misunderstanding the epic's literary purpose. Both perspectives offer valuable insights. History and imagination frequently coexist more comfortably than modern categories suggest. There are, inevitably, more speculative proposals. Some researchers have wondered whether memories of volcanic activity influence the legend. Southern Italy and Sicily contain some of the Mediterranean's most active geological regions. Underwater eruptions, unusual waves generated by seismic activity, or dramatic coastal changes may have contributed to stories describing living forces beneath the sea. Others have explored whether ancient tsunamis left impressions preserved within oral tradition for centuries. Catastrophic waves capable of overwhelming coastal settlements would undoubtedly have inspired powerful narratives passed from one generation to the next. These possibilities remain difficult to verify. The evidence is fragmentary, and direct connections cannot be established with confidence. Perhaps the greatest mystery lies not in identifying one precise location, but in understanding how ancient people interpreted the natural world. To a modern observer, a whirlpool is a measurable hydrodynamic phenomenon. To a Bronze Age sailor watching companions disappear into violent water, it may have seemed something entirely different. Nature possessed intention. The sea demanded respect. Invisible forces shaped every voyage. In such a world, myth became another language for describing reality. Even today, experienced mariners often speak of the ocean with unusual humility. Despite satellite navigation, sonar, and detailed weather forecasts, the sea retains an ability to surprise those who cross it. Sudden currents, unexpected storms, and hidden hazards continue reminding sailors that complete mastery remains an illusion. perhaps Homer understood this better than anyone. By giving those dangers names, faces, and personalities, he transformed ordinary fear into timeless memory. Standing today beside the cliffs overlooking the Strait of Messina, or any narrow channel where restless currents collide, it is not difficult to imagine how stories like Scylla and Charybdis first emerged. The roar of water echoes through the rocks. Shadows deepen inside coastal caves. Waves strike stone with startling force before retreating into silence once more. Whether the monsters were inspired by one specific place, woven from countless dangerous voyages, or created entirely through poetic imagination, they continue to guard one of the greatest mysteries of the ancient world. Somewhere between geology, navigation, memory, and myth, the true origins of Scylla and Charybdis remain concealed, waiting for the next careful observer to notice a detail that generations before may have quietly overlooked. If the cave of the Cyclops reminds us that even the most fantastic myths may have grown from real landscapes, the next mystery shifts our attention from stone to sound. This time, the danger cannot be seen rising from the sea or hiding within a mountain. It drifts through the air itself, carried across calm water by voices so captivating that they could overcome reason, memory, and the most powerful instinct of all, the will to survive. Few episodes in the Odyssey have inspired more debate than the encounter with the Sirens, and few mysteries blur the line between natural reality and poetic imagination so completely. The morning sea is almost perfectly still. Sunlight dances across gentle swells that barely disturb the surface, turning the water into a vast sheet of shimmering silver. Ahead, a cluster of low rocky islands emerges from the horizon, their pale limestone cliffs rising sharply above the waves. There are no visible harbors, no villages, and no smoke suggesting human life. Only jagged stone, scattered patches of hardy vegetation, and countless seabirds circling through the warm Mediterranean air. The silence feels unusually complete. Then, almost imperceptibly, another sound begins to emerge. It seems distant at first, impossible to identify. It is neither entirely human nor entirely natural. The melody drifts across the open water, carried effortlessly by the wind. Every note appears gentle, inviting, almost comforting. Rather than warning approaching sailors away, it encourages them forward. The closer they come, the more irresistible it becomes. According to Homer, this was the home of the Sirens. Unlike the Cyclops, Scylla, or Charybdis, the Sirens possessed no overwhelming physical strength. They needed neither sharp claws nor impossible size to destroy those who approached them. Their greatest weapon was knowledge of the human mind. They understood curiosity, ambition, pride, longing, and regret. They promised not treasure or immortality, but something perhaps even more tempting. They offered understanding. As Odysseus sailed past their island, the Sirens called directly to him. They claimed they knew everything that had happened before the walls of Troy. They knew the struggles of kings, the plans of gods, and the hidden truths of the world itself. If only he would stop and listen, they promised, he would leave wiser than any mortal who had ever lived. It was an extraordinary temptation. Knowledge itself became the trap. Unlike many mythical creatures, the Sirens did not deceive through obvious lies. Instead, they offered something genuinely valuable. Odysseus desperately wanted to hear their song. His solution was not to avoid temptation altogether, but to experience it without surrendering to it. He ordered his crew to seal their ears with beeswax, while he himself was tightly bound to the ship's mast. As the melody filled the air, he pleaded with his companions to release him. They ignored every desperate command until the voices finally disappeared behind the horizon. The scene remains one of the most psychologically sophisticated moments in ancient literature. Yet, it also raises a historical question that continues to fascinate scholars. Where did such an unusual story originate? The first clue may lie in the earliest artistic representations. Modern culture almost always imagines sirens as mermaids, with flowing hair and shimmering fishtails. That familiar image, however, belongs to much later traditions. During the centuries closest to Homer, artists consistently portrayed the sirens very differently. Greek pottery, carved reliefs, funerary monuments, and painted vessels show creatures with the bodies of birds and the heads of women. The distinction is important. Birds possess voices unlike any other creatures. Their songs travel enormous distances, particularly across water. They appear suddenly, vanish without warning, and often remain hidden despite being clearly heard. On rocky Mediterranean islands where large seabird colonies nested, thousands of overlapping calls could produce haunting soundscapes unlike anything experienced inland. Ancient sailors would have known these places well. Long before modern navigation, mariners relied heavily upon sound. The cry of birds often indicated nearby land before cliffs became visible. The changing direction of echoes revealed hidden coastlines. Wind moving through sea caves created strange tones that shifted with the weather. Every voyage demanded careful listening. Could one especially memorable coastline have inspired the legend? Many historians believe it is possible. Throughout southern Italy and the Tyrrhenian Sea lie numerous rocky islands surrounded by reefs capable of wrecking ships approaching too closely. Some possess remarkable acoustic properties. Waves striking hollow caverns produce deep, resonating sounds. Wind passing through narrow openings creates eerie whistles and prolonged vibrations that seem almost musical. Combined with the cries of thousands of nesting birds, these natural sounds could become astonishingly complex. To sailors exhausted after weeks at sea, such experiences may have felt profoundly unsettling. The islands traditionally associated with the Sirens are known today as Lee Galli, a small archipelago lying off the Amalfi coast of southern Italy. Even in antiquity, Greek and Roman writers frequently connected these dramatic rocky islands with Homer's account. Their geography is striking. Steep cliffs descend directly into deep water. Powerful currents surround portions of the coastline. Hidden reefs make navigation hazardous, particularly during poor weather or fading light. Approaching vessels must remain alert, avoiding distraction at precisely the moment unusual echoes and bird calls fill the air. Whether Homer himself intended Lee Galli, as the setting remains uncertain. The tradition developed centuries after the Odyssey was first composed. Nevertheless, the landscape possesses qualities that encourage the imagination. Archaeological evidence confirms that ancient sailors frequently traveled these waters. Merchant ships carrying bronze, pottery, olive oil, wine, textiles, and luxury goods connected Greece with southern Italy throughout the late Bronze Age and beyond. Every voyage depended upon careful knowledge of coastlines, currents, seasonal winds, and dangerous obstacles. Stories became essential navigational tools. Long before written charts became common, oral traditions preserved practical knowledge. Dangerous headlands acquired memorable names. Hidden reefs inspired cautionary tales. Entire coastlines became associated with supernatural guardians whose legends ensured that sailors never forgot the hazards awaiting them. Perhaps the Sirens began as one such warning. Do not approach those rocks. Do not abandon the oars. Do not become distracted by unfamiliar sounds. A frightening story often survives longer than simple instructions. Yet, the Sirens differ from ordinary navigational folklore in one remarkable respect. Their song promises complete knowledge. Why? Some scholars believe this detail reflects the intellectual culture emerging in Greece during the centuries when the epics reached their written form. Curiosity had become one of humanity's defining qualities. Travelers sought distant lands. Philosophers questioned accepted beliefs. Poets preserved memories reaching back into ages already fading from recollection. The Sirens transform that admirable curiosity into danger. They remind listeners that the desire to know everything may itself become destructive. Others interpret the story psychologically. The voices never threaten. Instead, they speak directly to the deepest longings already present within Odysseus himself. A warrior returning from 20 years of war and wandering naturally yearns for understanding. He wants meaning. He wants certainty. He wants to know whether suffering has accomplished anything at all. The Sirens recognize that longing immediately. Their song changes nothing. It simply awakens desires already hidden within the listener. Modern psychology has found this aspect particularly compelling. Temptation rarely succeeds by creating entirely new desires. More often, it amplifies existing ones. Homer appears to understand this with remarkable sophistication. There are, however, more tangible possibilities. Natural acoustics remain one of the most intriguing explanations. Researchers studying Mediterranean coastlines have documented numerous locations where echoes behave unpredictably. Certain cliff formations reflect sound repeatedly, creating the illusion that voices originate from impossible directions. Calm, atmospheric conditions over open water further enhance these effects, allowing conversations, bird calls, and wave sounds to travel extraordinary distances. Under specific weather conditions, acoustic refraction bends sound across the sea, making distant noises appear startlingly close. Ancient observers lacking scientific explanations naturally interpreted such phenomena through mythology. Perhaps the sea itself seemed to sing. Marine biology introduces another possibility. Several species inhabiting the Mediterranean produce haunting vocalizations. Dolphins communicate through complex whistles capable of traveling long distances. Monk seals generate eerie calls while resting within sea caves. Even certain fish create rhythmic sounds during mating seasons by vibrating specialized muscles against their swim bladders. Individually, none resemble human singing. Collectively, combined with wind, surf, and bird colonies, they may have produced remarkably unusual soundscapes. Then, there is human perception itself. Life aboard Bronze Age ships demanded extraordinary endurance. Crews spent weeks exposed to relentless sunlight, dehydration, salt spray, irregular sleep, poor nutrition, and constant physical labor. Modern maritime medicine recognizes that prolonged fatigue significantly influences attention, hearing, emotional responses, and judgment. Under such conditions, ordinary natural sounds might acquire extraordinary emotional power. This possibility does not diminish Homer's achievement. Rather, it demonstrates his profound understanding of human experience. He transformed recognizable psychological realities into timeless mythology. Ancient religious traditions add another layer. Birds frequently occupied sacred roles throughout Mediterranean civilizations. They served as messengers between gods and humans, symbols of prophecy, and guides between the worlds of the living and the dead. The Sirens' bird-like appearance therefore carried meanings extending beyond simple physical description. Some researchers believe they originated as funerary spirits. Early Greek art often places bird-bodied female figures upon tombs, suggesting connections with mourning, remembrance, and the soul's journey after death. If so, the Sirens may once have represented guardians standing between life and the unknown, gradually evolving into dangerous singers as oral traditions developed. This interpretation gains subtle support from Homer's narrative. those who followed the Sirens never returned. Their island became a place where memory ended. Whether through death or symbolic transformation, travelers disappeared forever. Other historians have proposed that the legend preserves distant memories of ritual singers or priestesses inhabiting isolated coastal sanctuaries. Ancient Mediterranean religions frequently employed sacred music within ceremonies intended to induce altered states of awareness. Visiting sailors encountering unfamiliar rituals from offshore might easily misunderstand what they observed, especially if language barriers prevented clear communication. No archaeological evidence confirms this theory. Yet it illustrates how cultural encounters sometimes evolve into myth. More speculative ideas venture still farther. Some researchers have suggested that the Sirens preserve faint memories of lost maritime civilizations, whose navigational knowledge appeared almost supernatural to neighboring cultures. Others imagine forgotten ceremonial centers established upon remote islands where astronomical observations, seasonal calendars, or sacred chants became associated with extraordinary wisdom. A handful of fringe theories even propose that the Sirens symbolize encoded knowledge transmitted through oral traditions now almost entirely lost. These interpretations remain highly controversial and lack broad scholarly acceptance. Even so, they reveal the remarkable depth of mystery surrounding a story often dismissed as simple fantasy. Perhaps the greatest clue lies not in the island itself, but in Odysseus' response. Unlike every previous danger, he does not seek to defeat the Sirens. He does not destroy them. He does not escape through violence. Instead, he acknowledges their power. He accepts his own vulnerability. He prepares carefully before encountering them. This may be the deepest wisdom contained within the episode. Certain mysteries cannot be conquered. They can only be approached with humility. Standing today upon a lonely Mediterranean headland as seabirds wheel above crashing waves, it is surprisingly easy to understand how stories like this first took shape. Wind whistles through fractured limestone. Echoes drift across narrow channels. Distant bird calls blend with the rhythm of the sea until natural sound itself becomes strangely difficult to interpret. Whether the Sirens were inspired by dangerous coastlines, unusual acoustics, sacred traditions, psychological insight, forgotten maritime warnings, or something that can no longer be recovered, their voices continue to resonate across nearly 3,000 years of human imagination. And perhaps that is the greatest mystery of all. Somewhere beyond the measurable world of geology, archaeology, and history, the song still lingers, quiet enough to avoid certainty, yet powerful enough that every generation feels compelled to listen once more, wondering whether the true inspiration has already been heard, or whether its final note remains hidden somewhere beyond the next silent horizon. If the voices of the Sirens remind us that the greatest dangers sometimes arrive as quiet invitations rather than obvious threats, then Odysseus's next destination leads us into an even stranger landscape. Here, temptation takes physical form. The boundary between humanity and nature begins to dissolve, and the island itself seems to possess a knowledge older than kings, older than cities, perhaps even older than the stories that attempted to describe it. Few places in the Odyssey have inspired more speculation than the mysterious Island of Circe, a place where myth, medicine, religion, and geography converge in ways that remain difficult to separate. Morning mist drifts slowly through a forest of towering oaks and evergreen pines, softening every outline beneath the pale glow of dawn. Dew clings to wild herbs growing between weathered stones, releasing a rich fragrance as the first rays of sunlight warm the earth. Small streams descend from hidden springs, winding quietly through moss-covered valleys before disappearing beneath dense vegetation. Deer move cautiously among the trees, while birds call from unseen branches high above the forest canopy. Then, almost unexpectedly, another sound emerges. The rhythmic click of a loom, the faint crackle of a fire, the distant growl of wolves. Yet the wolves do not hunt. The lions do not roar. Instead, they sit peacefully near a solitary stone house hidden deep within the woods, watching every approaching traveler with calm, almost human eyes. It is an unsettling image. Nothing appears violent, nothing appears broken, and perhaps that is precisely what makes the place so disturbing. According to Homer, this was Aea, the island ruled by the enchantress Circe. Unlike the chaotic dangers encountered elsewhere during Odysseus's journey, Aea is ordered, quiet, and strangely beautiful. Nature flourishes undisturbed. The forest seems untouched by war or human ambition. Time itself appears to move more slowly beneath its ancient trees. Yet, beneath that peaceful surface waits one of the most transformative encounters in all of Greek mythology. Odysseus' companions enter Circe's home expecting hospitality. Instead, they lose their humanity. After accepting food and wine prepared by their mysterious host, they are struck by her wand and transformed into swine. Their bodies change instantly, but Homer tells us something deeply unsettling. Their minds remain entirely human. They remember everything. They understand what has happened. They simply cannot speak. It is one of the most psychologically haunting images in ancient literature. For centuries, readers have asked the same question. Where did this extraordinary story come from? Was Circe entirely mythical? Or did Homer preserve distant memories of a real place whose unusual customs gradually evolved into legend? The search begins with geography. Homer identifies Circe's home simply as Aea, offering enough descriptive detail to stimulate curiosity but not enough to provide certainty. The island contains dense forests, abundant wildlife, freshwater springs, elevated viewpoints overlooking the sea, and enough fertile land to sustain both agriculture and livestock. Remarkably, several locations around the Mediterranean appear capable of fitting portions of this description. The most famous candidate is Monte Circeo, an imposing limestone headland along the western coast of Italy. Today, Monte Circeo forms part of the mainland. Yet, geological evidence suggests that during earlier periods, changing coastlines, lagoons, and rising sea levels created the impression of a genuine island or isolated peninsula separated from surrounding landscapes by extensive wetlands. To sailors approaching from offshore, it would have appeared almost completely detached from the mainland. The resemblance is striking. Steep, forested slopes dominate the landscape. Hidden caves penetrate deep into the mountain. Freshwater sources emerge naturally throughout the region. Broad views stretch across the Tyrrhenian Sea. Even the modern name preserves an ancient connection. For well over 2,000 years, local tradition has associated Monte Circeo with the home of Circe. Roman authors accepted the identification without great hesitation. Later travelers repeated the story. Medieval maps often labeled the region accordingly. The continuity of tradition is impressive. Yet, tradition alone does not constitute proof. Archaeology paints a more complex picture. Monte Circeo possesses one of the richest prehistoric records in Europe. Excavations have uncovered evidence of Neanderthal occupation dating back tens of thousands of years. Stone tools, animal remains, fireplaces, and cave deposits demonstrate that humans repeatedly returned to this landscape across enormous stretches of time. Bronze Age settlements later appeared nearby, confirming that the region remained inhabited during the era traditionally associated with the Trojan War. Still, no discovery has revealed anything directly connected to Circe. No sanctuary dedicated exclusively to her, no inscription mentioning Aea, no artifact identifying the legendary enchantress. The silence of archaeology leaves the question unresolved. Other researchers have proposed entirely different locations. Some argue that Aea lay much farther south among islands off the Italian coast. Others suggest the eastern Mediterranean. A handful even believe that Homer intentionally avoided identifying a precise location because Aea belonged as much to imagination as geography. This possibility deserves careful consideration. Unlike Ithaca, which represents home, or Troy, which represents war, Aea functions as a place of transformation. Everything changes there. The rules governing ordinary life no longer apply. Travelers arrive as one version of themselves and depart as another. Perhaps geography was never the central point. Yet, mythology often preserves memories hidden beneath symbolism. This has encouraged historians to examine Circe herself more closely. She occupies a curious position within Greek tradition. She is neither fully divine nor entirely mortal. She commands remarkable knowledge of plants, potions, and hidden natural forces. She understands animals. She predicts future events. She offers guidance unavailable anywhere else. Most remarkably, she transforms enemies into allies. Initially feared as a dangerous sorceress, she eventually becomes one of Odysseus's most important teachers. This complexity distinguishes her from many mythical figures. She cannot easily be categorized as villain or protector. Perhaps this reflects an older cultural memory. Some historians believe Circe may preserve distant recollections of priestesses, healers, or religious specialists who possessed extensive botanical knowledge long before formal medical traditions emerged. Across the ancient Mediterranean, women frequently maintained expertise in herbal remedies, childbirth, ritual purification, and medicinal preparation. Such knowledge inspired both admiration and suspicion. A healer capable of relieving suffering might also understand poisons. The same plant could cure or kill depending upon dosage. To outsiders unfamiliar with these practices, such abilities might appear almost supernatural. This interpretation becomes especially intriguing when considering the mysterious herb known as moly. Before confronting Circe, Odysseus receives this rare plant from Hermes. Homer describes it as possessing a black root and a white flower, while emphasizing that ordinary humans cannot easily obtain it. Scholars have debated its identity for centuries. Among the leading candidates is the snowdrop, whose bulbs contain galantamine, a naturally occurring compound recognized by modern medicine for its effects upon the nervous system. Remarkably, galantamine can counteract certain toxic substances produced by other plants. Some historians have cautiously suggested that Homer may have preserved fragments of genuine pharmacological knowledge within a mythological framework. The idea remains speculative. Yet it demonstrates how surprisingly sophisticated ancient botanical traditions may have been. Other plants have also entered the discussion. Mandrake, henbane, belladonna, datura. Each possesses powerful psychoactive properties capable of altering perception, memory, behavior, or consciousness. Improper preparation can produce vivid hallucinations, confusion, temporary paralysis, or complete disorientation. To observers lacking scientific understanding, victims might indeed appear transformed into entirely different beings. Perhaps stories of magical metamorphosis grew gradually from encounters with such plants. Anthropologists have proposed another possibility. Transformation into animals appears in mythologies across many cultures. Often, these changes symbolize shifts in human behavior rather than literal physical alteration. The companions becoming swine may represent greed, excess, uncontrolled appetite, or surrender to instinct. Circe reveals qualities already present within those she enchants. Odysseus alone resists because he approaches with preparation, discipline, and self-awareness. The transformation therefore becomes psychological rather than biological. This interpretation has gained considerable influence among literary scholars. Yet, it raises another question. Would Homer's earliest audiences have separated symbolism from reality as modern readers often do? Probably not. Ancient myth rarely demanded such distinctions. A story could simultaneously communicate religious truth, historical memory, moral instruction, and practical knowledge without requiring any contradiction between them. Circe herself may therefore embody multiple layers of meaning at once. The natural environment surrounding Monte Circeo supports this complexity. The region contains extraordinary botanical diversity. Mediterranean forests have long supplied medicinal herbs, aromatic plants, resins, fungi, and roots valued throughout antiquity. Traditional herbal knowledge accumulated over countless generations, much of it transmitted orally rather than through written texts. Certain isolated communities became renowned for specialized healing traditions. Others acquired reputations for dangerous potions. Reputation often grows faster than evidence. A skilled herbalist living in an isolated forest could gradually become remembered as an enchantress capable of altering human nature itself. Religion introduces another fascinating dimension. Some scholars suggest Circe may preserve echoes of prehistoric goddess traditions predating classical Greek religion. Throughout the Mediterranean, archaeological discoveries reveal long-standing reverence for female figures associated with fertility, wild animals, vegetation, healing, and cycles of transformation. Although direct connections remain impossible to establish, similarities continue attracting scholarly attention. Circe commands nature rather than conquering it. Animals obey her peacefully. Plants become instruments of knowledge. The forest itself appears almost sacred. These themes resonate with much older religious traditions extending deep into prehistoric Europe. Others remain more cautious. Similar motifs appear independently across numerous cultures, making direct historical continuity difficult to demonstrate. Still, the possibility remains intriguing. The figure of Circe may preserve fragments from belief systems already ancient when Homer composed the Odyssey. Even the architecture of her home deserves attention. Unlike fortified palaces dominating Mycenaean kingdoms, Circe lives in apparent isolation. Her house contains no visible guards, no surrounding city, no army. Knowledge itself becomes her protection. This image contrasts sharply with Bronze Age political culture, where power usually depended upon walls, weapons, and organized authority. Perhaps Homer intentionally created this contrast, or perhaps he remembered remote communities existing beyond the control of great kingdoms. The island also marks a crucial turning point in Odysseus' journey. Until reaching Aeaea, he reacts to events as they unfold. After leaving Circe, his voyage becomes guided by knowledge rather than chance. She instructs him to descend into the realm of the dead. She explains the dangers awaiting ahead. She reveals strategies for surviving threats that would otherwise prove fatal. In many respects, she transforms Odysseus from wandering survivor into informed traveler. Knowledge becomes the true gift of the island. More speculative theories naturally exist. Some researchers have imagined that Aeaea preserves memories of isolated ritual centers where initiates underwent symbolic transformations before returning to ordinary society. Others suggest distant recollections of advanced herbal schools whose practical knowledge gradually acquired supernatural reputations. A handful of fringe interpretations even propose connections with forgotten Bronze Age cultures, possessing unusually sophisticated understanding of medicinal plants, navigation, astronomy, or altered states of consciousness. These theories remain highly controversial and lack broad scholarly acceptance. Yet they illustrate how persistently Circe continues resisting simple explanation. Unlike many mythical figures, she grows more mysterious the closer historians examine her. She exists simultaneously as healer and sorceress, host and captor, teacher and tester, guardian of dangerous knowledge. Standing today upon the heights of Monte Circeo as evening mist rises from the surrounding forests, it becomes surprisingly easy to understand why ancient travelers connected this remarkable landscape with one of mythology's most enigmatic women. The mountain seems almost detached from the modern world. Hidden caves disappear beneath dense woodland. The scent of wild herbs lingers in the air. Wolves have long vanished, yet the silence they once inhabited remains. Whether Aea truly stood upon this headland, upon another forgotten island, or only within the geography of epic poetry, may never be answered with certainty. But somewhere between archaeology, ancient medicine, oral tradition, sacred ritual, and human imagination, the island of Circe continues to exist, not simply as a destination on Odysseus' voyage, but as one of the most enduring mysteries of the ancient Mediterranean, inviting every new generation to step cautiously beneath its trees and ask whether its greatest enchantment was ever magic at all, or simply knowledge that the rest of the world had not yet learned to understand. If the island of Circe showed how an ordinary landscape could become inseparable from stories of transformation, the next destination on Odysseus' journey presents an even more unsettling possibility. Here, the mystery is carved into cliffs and hidden inside a cavern so immense that generations have wondered whether myth preserved the memory of a real place. Behind the legend of the Cyclops lies a question that refuses to disappear. Did Homer invent a giant with a single eye, or did an extraordinary landscape, and perhaps something far stranger, give birth to one of history's most enduring monsters? The coastline rises abruptly from the sea, a wall of weathered limestone sculpted by wind, salt, and countless centuries of crashing waves. Sea caves punctuate the cliffs like dark entrances into another world, their interiors swallowing daylight almost immediately. Cool air flows from the openings, carrying the smell of damp earth, mineral-rich stone, and ancient moss. Above, sparse grasses cling to narrow ledges where wild goats move effortlessly across impossible slopes. Their bells echo faintly through the ravines before disappearing into the silence. One cave stands larger than the others. Its entrance is broad enough for dozens of people to enter side by side. Inside, the ceiling rises so high that voices vanish before reaching the upper darkness. Massive stalactites descend like frozen pillars, while ancient dripstone formations create the impression of enormous columns supporting the mountain itself. Toward the rear, natural alcoves offer shelter from wind and rain. The floor is relatively level, making it an ideal refuge for both humans and livestock. Even today, it feels less like an empty cave than a place that has merely been left unattended. It is not difficult to imagine someone returning at sunset. According to the Odyssey, that someone was Polyphemus. The encounter remains one of the defining episodes of ancient literature. Seeking provisions after landing upon an unfamiliar island, Odysseus and his companions enter what appears to be an abandoned shepherd's cave. They discover baskets overflowing with cheese, pens crowded with lambs and young goats, and carefully arranged vessels filled with fresh milk. Everything suggests ordinary pastoral life. Only the scale feels unusual. When evening arrives, the owner returns, driving an immense flock before him. He seals the entrance with an enormous stone that no ordinary group of men could hope to move. Only then do the visitors realize they are trapped inside the home of a being unlike anything they have ever encountered. Polyphemus is enormous, immensely strong, and terrifyingly indifferent to the customs that governed Greek society. He neither welcomes strangers nor offers hospitality. Instead, he asks only one question: "Who are you?" Before the conversation has truly begun, he seizes two of Odysseus' companions, killing and consuming them before the horrified survivors. From that moment onward, the cave becomes both prison and battlefield. Yet, beneath the unforgettable drama lies a surprisingly historical mystery. Could Homer have based this episode upon a real location? For more than 2,000 years, the island most closely associated with the Cyclops has been Sicily. Ancient Greek colonists who settled there during the first millennium BC encountered a landscape unlike anything they had known in mainland Greece. Towering volcanic mountains dominated the horizon. Vast lava fields stretched toward the sea. Deep caves penetrated the cliffs. Coastal rock formations assumed dramatic shapes sculpted by ancient eruptions. The centerpiece of this landscape was Mount Etna. Visible from enormous distances, Etna inspired awe throughout antiquity. Smoke frequently drifted from its summit. Tremors shook the surrounding countryside without warning. Rivers of molten rock occasionally descended its slopes, consuming forests and settlements alike. To ancient observers, the mountain appeared alive. Its unpredictable behavior demanded explanation. Later, Greek mythology eventually located the workshops of the divine blacksmith Hephaestus beneath Etna, where the Cyclopes forged thunderbolts for Zeus. Although this tradition differs from Homer's portrayal of Polyphemus as a shepherd rather than a smith, it demonstrates how closely Sicily became linked with stories of giant, one-eyed beings. Perhaps that association began much earlier than surviving literature suggests. Along Sicily's eastern coast stands a remarkable series of volcanic sea stacks known today as the Faraglioni of Aci Trezza. Rising dramatically from the Mediterranean, these dark basalt columns appear almost deliberately arranged by unseen hands. Local tradition identifies them as the very rocks Polyphemus hurled after Odysseus' departing ship when the blinded giant finally realized his enemy's true identity. The story has survived for centuries. Visitors still hear guides recounting the tale as waves break against the same volcanic formations. No archaeological evidence confirms the tradition. Yet, the visual connection remains remarkably powerful. Elsewhere around eastern Sicily, numerous caves have been proposed as candidates for Polyphemus's dwelling. Several contain evidence of prehistoric occupation extending back thousands of years. Archaeologists have uncovered fireplaces, pottery fragments, stone tools, animal bones, storage pits, and traces of repeated seasonal use. These discoveries reveal something important. Large coastal caves genuinely functioned as homes, workshops, and livestock shelters throughout prehistoric and Bronze Age Sicily. The activities Homer describes were entirely realistic. Cheese production, milk storage, seasonal shepherding, goat herding. These were ordinary aspects of Mediterranean pastoral life. The setting itself required very little invention. This realism has encouraged scholars to examine Homer's description more carefully. Remarkably, the cave operates almost exactly as one would expect from a practical shepherd's shelter. Pens separate young animals from adults. Containers preserve milk for cheese-making. Firewood remains stacked for cooking. The entrance provides natural security against predators. These are not random literary details. They reflect genuine familiarity with traditional livestock management. Whether Homer observed such places personally or inherited accurate descriptions through oral tradition remains uncertain. Either way, the authenticity is striking. Then there is the giant himself. Why did Homer imagine a shepherd of impossible size possessing only one eye? Among all creatures in Greek mythology, the Cyclops possesses one of the most distinctive appearances. For centuries, scholars have searched for possible inspirations. Perhaps the most famous explanation involves fossil discoveries. Throughout Sicily and several neighboring Mediterranean islands, erosion occasionally exposes the skulls of extinct dwarf elephants that inhabited the region during prehistoric times. These elephants disappeared long before written history, leaving only scattered bones buried within caves and ancient sediments. To modern anatomists, their skulls are immediately recognizable. To ancient observers unfamiliar with elephants, they appear astonishingly different. Most striking is the enormous opening positioned at the center of the skull where the trunk once attached. Without knowledge of elephant anatomy, this cavity resembles an enormous single eye socket. The resemblance is surprisingly convincing. 19th-century paleontologists first suggested that such discoveries may have inspired stories of one-eyed giants. Ancient shepherds, farmers, or travelers uncovering these massive skulls could easily have imagined they belonged to enormous human-like beings. The idea remains speculative. No ancient text explicitly links fossil discoveries with Cyclopes. Yet, Sicily contains both the fossils and the legends in remarkable proximity. It remains one of the most intriguing natural explanations ever proposed. Another possibility focuses upon volcanic landscapes themselves. Massive lava boulders scattered across Etna's slopes often resemble collapsed fortifications or gigantic projectiles. Ancient eruptions hurled enormous blocks across considerable distances, leaving behind fields of broken stone unlike anything seen elsewhere in Greece. To later generations, unfamiliar with volcanic processes, such landscapes may have appeared to preserve evidence of tremendous battles fought by beings of extraordinary strength. This interpretation gains additional interest when considering Polyphemus's final act. Unable to pursue Odysseus by sea, he tears enormous rocks from the cliffside and throws them toward the escaping ship. Could this vivid image preserve distant memories of volcanic eruptions launching immense stones across the landscape? The connection cannot be demonstrated. Still, the visual parallels remain compelling. Anthropologists have suggested another approach. Throughout history, neighboring cultures frequently exaggerated one another's appearance. Exceptional height became giantism. Foreign languages became incomprehensible growls. Unfamiliar customs evolved into evidence of savagery. Perhaps the Cyclops originated through similar processes. Imagine isolated shepherding communities living high among rugged volcanic landscapes. Their lifestyle differed dramatically from the organized agricultural societies familiar to Mycenaean Greeks. They possessed few permanent settlements, little centralized government, and limited contact with outsiders. To visiting sailors, such communities might appear astonishingly primitive. Over generations, ordinary differences could gradually become magnified through storytelling. The solitary shepherd became a giant. His unfamiliar appearance became monstrous. His isolated life became evidence of something almost inhuman. While impossible to verify, this explanation reflects patterns observed repeatedly throughout folklore around the world. The Cyclops also occupies a fascinating symbolic role. Greek civilization placed enormous importance upon hospitality, known as xenia. Travelers expected shelter, food, and respectful treatment regardless of personal identity until proper introductions had taken place. This custom formed one of the foundations of ancient social life. Polyphemus rejects every aspect of it. He mocks the authority of Zeus. He ignores sacred obligations. He consumes guests rather than feeding them. In literary terms, he represents civilization turned completely inside out. Yet, his cave complicates that interpretation. Everything inside demonstrates remarkable organization. His livestock are carefully managed. His food is expertly prepared. His home is orderly. He is not chaotic. He simply follows different rules. This subtle distinction has intrigued many historians. Perhaps Homer intended not merely to describe barbarism, but to explore encounters between fundamentally different cultures whose values could not easily be reconciled. Archaeology offers another perspective. Excavations throughout Sicily reveal remarkable cultural diversity during the Bronze Age. Indigenous communities interacted with traders arriving from mainland Greece, the Aegean Islands, and other Mediterranean regions. Exchange networks carried metals, pottery, livestock, textiles, and ideas across surprising distances. These contacts were not always peaceful. Competition over resources, misunderstandings, and cultural differences undoubtedly occurred. Could the Cyclops preserve distant memories of such encounters? Rather than documenting one specific event, perhaps the story condenses generations of interaction into a single, unforgettable narrative. The cave itself then becomes a symbolic meeting place between worlds. One maritime, one pastoral, one organized through expanding trade, the other shaped by ancient local traditions. Some researchers have focused upon the giant's blindness. Odysseus does not defeat Polyphemus through superior strength. He succeeds through intelligence, patience, and language. Most famously, he identifies himself as nobody, ensuring that when the injured Cyclops cries for help, neighboring giants misunderstand his desperate calls. This triumph of wit over force has often been interpreted philosophically. Yet it may also reflect historical reality. Throughout human history, technological innovation and strategic thinking have repeatedly overcome overwhelming physical power. Perhaps the Cyclops symbolizes an older world gradually giving way to a new one. More speculative theories venture even farther. A few scholars have proposed that Polyphemus preserves distorted memories of unusually tall individuals affected by rare medical conditions such as pituitary gigantism. Ancient skeletons demonstrating exceptional height have occasionally been discovered throughout Europe and the Mediterranean, although none approaches the scale described by Homer. Others imagine that memories of extinct Ice Age animals, discovered only as scattered fossil remains, gradually merged with stories of isolated mountain dwellers. Some fringe researchers even suggest that Cyclopean legends preserve recollections of unknown prehistoric populations whose appearance differed significantly from later Mediterranean societies. These interpretations remain highly controversial and lack broad scholarly acceptance. Still, they reveal the remarkable persistence of the mystery. Few mythical creatures have inspired such diverse explanations. The cave itself continues offering new questions. Many large Mediterranean caverns remain only partially explored. Geological surveys occasionally uncover hidden chambers, ancient hearths, ceremonial deposits, and prehistoric artwork previously concealed for thousands of years. Each new discovery reminds us how incomplete our understanding remains. Entire chapters of human prehistory continue emerging from caves once thought thoroughly investigated. Perhaps somewhere along Sicily's rugged coastline, or on another island entirely, a forgotten cave still preserves evidence capable of reshaping our understanding of Homer's inspiration. Standing today within one of these immense coastal caverns, listening as waves echo through darkness carved over millions of years, it becomes surprisingly easy to understand why ancient imaginations filled such places with extraordinary inhabitants. Light fades quickly inside. Familiar sounds become distorted. Every shadow appears larger than expected. The boundary between natural wonder and supernatural possibility grows remarkably thin. If the cave of the Cyclops invites us to wonder whether a real landscape gave rise to the image of a one-eyed giant, the next mystery asks an even quieter question. What if one of the most mysterious places in the Odyssey never threatened travelers with monsters or violence at all? What if its greatest danger was comfort itself? Somewhere beyond familiar coastlines, Homer describes a land where ambition faded, memory softened, and every desire to return home slowly disappeared. It is one of the shortest episodes in the Odyssey, yet it has inspired one of the longest searches. The shoreline appears almost impossibly peaceful. Soft waves slide across wide stretches of pale sand, leaving delicate patterns that vanish with the next tide. Palm trees sway gently beneath a warm breeze, carrying the scent of flowering shrubs and salt carried inland from the sea. Beyond the coast, fertile valleys stretch toward low hills covered in hardy vegetation that has survived countless seasons of sun and wind. Freshwater pools shimmer beneath clusters of reeds where birds gather in remarkable numbers, filling the morning air with gentle calls instead of harsh cries. Nothing here feels dangerous. There are no towering cliffs, no volcanic mountains, no hidden caves echoing with unseen movement. The landscape seems almost designed to calm the restless mind. Even time appears to move differently. Afternoons drift into evening without urgency. The horizon remains still beneath endless blue skies. Travelers arriving after weeks upon uncertain seas might easily believe they had discovered the one place where every hardship had finally come to an end. According to Homer, this was the land of the Lotus-Eaters. Unlike the Cyclops or the Sirens, its inhabitants offer no violence and no deception. They welcome strangers peacefully, sharing the fruit of the mysterious lotus plant with Odysseus's companions. Those who taste it do not fall asleep or lose consciousness. Instead, something far more subtle begins to happen. They forget. Not completely, not instantly. Rather, their desire to continue the journey quietly dissolves. The hardships of the voyage no longer seem important. The longing for home slowly disappears. The memory of family fades beneath an overwhelming feeling of contentment. Odysseus is forced to drag his companions back to the ships against their will before sailing away as quickly as possible. It is a remarkably understated episode. No battle occurs, no monster appears. Yet, Homer presents the Lotus-Eaters as one of the greatest dangers encountered during the entire voyage. Why? And perhaps more importantly, where was this mysterious land? For more than 2,000 years, historians have searched for an answer. The earliest clue appears in ancient geography. Several Greek writers identified the Lotus-Eaters with regions along the North African coast, particularly parts of modern Tunisia and nearby Libya. Long before Roman expansion, these coastlines were known to Mediterranean sailors who traded with local communities across the Southern Sea. One location appears repeatedly within ancient sources: the island of Gerba. Situated just off the southeastern coast of modern Tunisia, Gerba possesses many characteristics matching Homer's description. Its climate is unusually mild. Palm groves flourish across much of the island. Fertile farmland supports olive trees, date palms, and fruit orchards despite the surrounding arid landscape. Freshwater springs emerge naturally from underground aquifers, making long-term settlement possible even during dry seasons. To exhausted Bronze Age sailors arriving unexpectedly after difficult voyages, such an island might indeed have seemed almost miraculous. Ancient writers certainly believed so. The Greek historian Herodotus described populations known as the Lotophagi, or Lotus-Eaters, inhabiting portions of North Africa. Although writing centuries after the traditional date of the Trojan War, he preserved traditions suggesting that communities associated with the mysterious lotus genuinely existed. Later, Roman authors repeated similar accounts. None, however, could identify the precise plant described by Homer. That question remains one of the greatest mysteries surrounding the entire episode. What exactly was the lotus? Modern readers often imagine the sacred lotus flower associated with Asian traditions. Yet, the Mediterranean world possessed no native population of that particular species. Scholars therefore began searching for alternatives. One of the strongest candidates is the jujube tree, Ziziphus lotus. This hardy shrub grows naturally throughout North Africa and produces small edible fruits resembling dates or apples. The fruit possesses a pleasant sweet flavor and can be eaten fresh or dried. Even today, local communities prepare jams, breads, fermented beverages, and traditional desserts using its fruit. Ancient Greek writers occasionally associated this plant with the legendary lotus. The connection appears plausible. Yet, one major problem remains. Jujube fruit does not erase memory. It contains no known compounds capable of producing the extraordinary psychological effects described by Homer. Other possibilities have therefore emerged. Some researchers point toward the blue water lily once cultivated extensively along the Nile. Certain compounds within this plant may produce mild relaxation or altered states when prepared under particular conditions. Others have proposed species of date palm, fermented fruit beverages, or combinations of local herbs capable of influencing mood. Still, others argue that the lotus never referred to a single botanical species at all. Perhaps it symbolized an entire category of exotic plants unfamiliar to Greek audiences. The mystery deepens when anthropology enters the discussion. Many traditional societies throughout history have possessed ceremonial foods or drinks intended to create feelings of peace, spiritual reflection, or temporary separation from ordinary concerns. Some involve naturally fermented fruits. Others rely upon carefully prepared herbs used within religious rituals. Such practices rarely erase memory. They do, however, alter emotional priorities. A traveler experiencing profound tranquility after months of hardship might genuinely lose interest in continuing a dangerous journey. Perhaps Homer transformed such experiences into literary symbolism. Psychology offers another fascinating interpretation. The Lotus-Eaters appear immediately after Odysseus survives repeated disasters. His crew has endured war, storms, exhaustion, uncertainty, and grief. Modern psychology recognizes that individuals exposed to prolonged trauma sometimes experience emotional withdrawal when finally reaching safety. Motivation diminishes. Ambition weakens. The desire simply to remain where suffering has ended becomes overwhelming. The lotus may represent this universal human response, not magical forgetfulness, emotional surrender. Home remains remembered. It simply no longer feels worth pursuing. This reading explains why Odysseus reacts so decisively. He understands that the greatest obstacle to returning home may not be external danger. It may be the temptation to stop trying altogether. Still, geography continues inviting investigation. Djerba is hardly the only proposed location. Some historians favor coastal Libya, where ancient descriptions mention populations consuming fruits identified as lotus by Greek travelers. Others suggest portions of the Gulf of Gabes, whose sheltered waters, fertile coastal plains, and abundant vegetation contrast dramatically with surrounding desert landscapes. A few researchers even explore regions farther west, arguing that centuries of changing coastlines may have concealed ancient settlements now lost beneath sediment or the sea. Archaeology complicates every proposal. Excavations throughout North Africa confirm extensive maritime contact between Mediterranean civilizations during the Late Bronze Age. Pottery originating in the Aegean has been discovered at several coastal sites, while North African goods reached distant ports across the Mediterranean. These discoveries demonstrate that long-distance interaction certainly occurred. Greek sailors, or at least their predecessors, could have encountered unfamiliar coastal cultures long before Homer composed the Odyssey. Yet, none of these archaeological sites provides evidence specifically identifying the Lotus-Eaters. No inscription preserves the name. No artwork depicts the famous encounter. The silence remains complete. Perhaps this is unsurprising. The Lotus-Eaters themselves perform no remarkable actions. They build no monumental architecture. They wage no memorable wars. Their defining characteristic is simply peaceful existence. History often leaves fewer traces of tranquility than of conflict. Another intriguing possibility concerns navigation. Ancient sailors depended entirely upon seasonal winds and coastal landmarks. Storms frequently carried ships far from intended routes, depositing exhausted crews upon unfamiliar shores. Local hospitality often determined whether survival remained possible. Imagine arriving after weeks at sea with depleted supplies, damaged vessels, and exhausted companions. Fresh fruit, clean water, friendly strangers, shelter beneath shade. Such experiences might easily assume almost mythical significance when retold years later. The memory of relief gradually becomes transformed into something extraordinary. Over generations, hospitality itself becomes enchantment. Some linguists have suggested that the lotus symbolizes forgetfulness, because memory occupied a sacred place within Greek culture. Oral tradition preserved genealogy, law, navigation, religion, and history long before widespread literacy. Forgetting, therefore, represented more than simple absent-mindedness. To forget one's home was to lose identity itself. Odysseus' companions do not merely abandon their destination. They abandon the story that defines who they are. The lotus interrupts memory. Memory sustains civilization. This symbolic interpretation resonates strongly with the larger themes of the Odyssey. Every stage of the journey tests a different aspect of human identity. The Lotus-Eaters test remembrance. The Cyclops tests intelligence. Circe tests self-control. The Sirens test curiosity. Each danger appears psychological before becoming physical. Religion introduces another possibility. Certain ancient Mediterranean cults emphasized ritual meals intended to symbolize spiritual transformation or separation from ordinary existence. Participants temporarily left behind familiar identities before returning renewed through sacred ceremony. Could distant memories of such rituals have contributed to Homer's account? Some historians believe elements of this explanation deserve consideration. Visitors unfamiliar with local customs might misunderstand ceremonial practices involving unusual foods or drinks, gradually transforming religious experiences into stories of magical fruit. No direct evidence confirms this idea, yet cultural misunderstandings have often generated myths throughout history. Natural science has inspired additional theories. Several North African plants contain compounds capable of mild sedation, relaxation, or dreamlike states when consumed under particular conditions. Fermentation may enhance certain effects, while combinations of herbs occasionally produce experiences differing significantly from individual ingredients. Researchers have occasionally explored whether ancient communities possessed botanical knowledge now largely forgotten. Most specialists remain cautious. No known Mediterranean plant precisely matches Homer's description. Whatever inspired the story appears more complex than simple pharmacology. Then there are the more speculative possibilities. Some researchers wonder whether the Lotus-Eaters preserve memories of an isolated coastal culture whose remarkably peaceful lifestyle contrasted so dramatically with the conflict-ridden Bronze Age Mediterranean that visiting sailors struggled to understand it. Others imagine survivors of earlier civilizations living quietly along remote shores, preserving traditions fundamentally different from expanding Mycenaean kingdoms. A handful of fringe theories suggest the lotus represented knowledge rather than food, perhaps sacred teachings encouraging detachment from worldly ambition. According to this interpretation, those who forgot home had not lost memory at all. They had discovered a different understanding of life's purpose. These ideas remain controversial and unsupported by mainstream scholarship. Nevertheless, they illustrate how remarkably fertile this brief Homeric episode has become. Perhaps the greatest mystery lies within Homer's own wording. He never describes the Lotus-Eaters as evil. Unlike nearly every other obstacle, they display genuine kindness. They neither imprison nor threaten strangers. They simply share what they themselves value most. The danger emerges only because Odysseus seeks something different. To the Lotus-Eaters, remaining peacefully within the present moment may have seemed entirely reasonable. To Odysseus, whose identity depends upon completing the journey home, it represents disaster. The contrast is profoundly human. Even today, travelers occasionally discover places where ordinary ambition begins to loosen its grip. Quiet islands, remote coastlines, mountain villages untouched by urgency, landscapes where schedules dissolve and the relentless pursuit of future goals briefly gives way to simple existence. Such places possess no magic, yet leaving them often proves unexpectedly difficult. Standing today along the sunlit shores of Gerba, watching warm Mediterranean waves wash gently across ancient beaches, while date palms sway beneath endless blue skies, it becomes surprisingly easy to understand why generations associated this landscape with Homer's mysterious Lotus-Eaters. Time slows almost imperceptibly. The sea remains calm. The horizon invites neither haste nor struggle. Everything encourages stillness. Odysseus' companions do not merely abandon their destination. In many ways, they abandon the very story that defines who they are. Throughout the Odyssey, identity is inseparable from memory. A person's name, family, homeland, and purpose are all sustained by the ability to remember where they came from and where they hope to return. The lotus interrupts that fragile connection. It does not erase the past through violence or force. Instead, it gently weakens the emotional bond that gives memory its meaning. Home is no longer a place waiting to be reached, but a distant idea that slowly loses its importance. In this sense, the lotus becomes far more than a mysterious plant. It becomes a symbol of forgetting one's purpose. Memory sustains civilization because memory preserves history, tradition, family, and identity itself. Without memory, even the strongest ambitions gradually dissolve into quiet acceptance. This symbolic interpretation resonates deeply with the larger themes woven throughout the Odyssey. Every stage of Odysseus's remarkable journey examines a different dimension of what it means to remain human. The Lotus-Eaters challenge remembrance and the determination to continue despite comfort. The Cyclops tests intelligence against overwhelming physical strength. Circe explores temptation, discipline, and the struggle to preserve one's humanity when confronted by hidden knowledge. The Sirens test curiosity and the dangerous desire to pursue forbidden truths regardless of the consequences. Again and again, the greatest threats are psychological long before they become physical. Homer suggests that the human mind may prove far more vulnerable than the human body. Before swords are drawn or monsters appear, each challenge begins within the traveler himself. Religion introduces another intriguing possibility. Throughout the ancient Mediterranean, numerous religious traditions incorporated ritual meals or sacred drinks intended to symbolize spiritual transformation. Participants temporarily stepped away from their ordinary identities before returning renewed through carefully structured ceremonies. Such rituals often marked important transitions, whether initiation into religious communities, purification after significant events, or symbolic journeys between the mortal and divine worlds. Could distant memories of practices like these have contributed to Homer's remarkable account? Some historians believe this possibility deserves thoughtful consideration. Sailors arriving from distant lands unfamiliar with local customs and sacred traditions, might easily have misunderstood ceremonial gatherings involving unusual foods, fermented beverages, or ritual herbs. Over generations, such misunderstandings could gradually evolve into stories of magical fruit capable of altering memory itself. No direct evidence confirms this interpretation, and no surviving archaeological discovery links a specific religious ceremony to the story of the Lotus-Eaters. Yet, history repeatedly demonstrates how cultural misunderstandings can become powerful legends. Travelers often describe unfamiliar traditions using concepts they already understand, unintentionally transforming ordinary customs into extraordinary tales. A ritual intended to represent spiritual renewal might later become remembered as supernatural enchantment. A symbolic act of leaving one's former identity behind could eventually be retold as literal forgetfulness. Across the ancient world, myths frequently emerged from encounters between cultures whose beliefs differed profoundly, reminding us that the boundary between observation and imagination has always been remarkably thin. Natural science has inspired another series of fascinating theories. Botanists have examined numerous North African plants capable of producing mild relaxation, drowsiness, dreamlike sensations, or subtle changes in perception when consumed under particular conditions. Certain fruits become more potent after fermentation, while combinations of herbs may create effects quite different from those produced by individual plants alone. Researchers have occasionally explored whether ancient communities possessed sophisticated botanical knowledge that has largely disappeared over time. Traditional healers across many cultures understood medicinal properties that remained unknown to outsiders for centuries, suggesting that forgotten expertise may once have existed throughout the Mediterranean as well.